welcome to the American Journal of Sports Medicine top cited article series. And today we have the top cited article in 2002 from Dr. Salvio Wu on the biomechanical analysis of an anatomic ACL reconstruction, looking at double bundle versus single bundle reconstruction. And we have Dr. Wu here on the webinar, and thank you so much for joining us. And Dr. Wu is probably one of the most well-known orthopedic knee researchers in the world, and it's really honored to have you here with us.
Well, thank you, Tiger. It's a pleasure for me to have a chat with you and also to talk about this particular publication. I think it's we're very proud of it, and of course I will try to do my best to explain to the audience about something about this particular publication.
So this one was cited almost 800 times in AJSM, and what did you get the idea back in 2002 to come up with looking at biomechanical reconstruction of the ACL? We're doing a double bundle versus single bundle. Did the single bundle not work as well? Is that why you guys started thinking doing double reconstruction? And how did you come up with the idea of doing this biomechanical study?
Yeah, it's sort of a long story. We in the middle 90s, we have developed a robotic universal force sensor testing system. And this is a very powerful tool now that is being used by at least, I would say, 50 laboratories worldwide. This particular device allows you to test the same specimen. I can collect the data from the single specimen, from intact knee to all the way to initial reconstruction. And when you do that, the data become much more powerful because the individual specimen variation is taken out of the analysis, so-called the repeated measure analysis variance. So therefore, we can actually, based on the single specimen, of course you do many of them, the data is much more easy to distinguish difference between one condition to the other condition to the other condition. So we did a bunch of studies. Then finally, at the turn of the millennium, turn of the new millennium, it was sort of I have so many good fellows come for a couple of years, some 3 years in the laboratory from Japan, Europe, Taiwan, and you name it, we have them. And I got some real good residents in the laboratory at that time, dedicated and great graduate students. So with the equipment, with the people, and the subject matter at that time in hot debate is about what can we improve to improve the ACL reconstruction. So it's kind of like the Chinese say it's a harmony of 天时地利人和. So it's kind of like I'm using this because you're Chinese, Tiger. It's harmony between the heaven, earth, and people. So we did a bunch of, actually a series of studies. This is just one of the 4 studies we've done to deal with this particular area. The first study actually was published a little earlier in JBJS, comparing patellar tendon reconstruction to hamstring. Then we did 3 studies on single versus a double bundle ACL reconstruction, because that was a big debate. After people talk about tunnel positioning, naturally it gravitates to its single double bundle. There was a study actually done with John Lowe and as a first author published in Arthroscopy Journal. As is to look at whether we should put the graph at the 10 o'clock or the 11 o'clock position. And following that article, then we do this study of double bundle reconstruction by putting one bundle in and take out one bundle and then at a time. Then look at it. We could, because of robotic testing system, we could do that. And then a third study is actually looking at a posterior bundle. So in these particular studies, compare full graft, anterior graft, medial position graft, posterior lateral graft. So you can get all this information and compare it. What we found is that if you split the two grafts, double bundle actually is better than single bundle. So you can, that's partly reconfirm the 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock position because you have a little bit more moment arc. And the paper pretty much show data clearly that the advantage of so-called double bundle reconstruction. And that's about it in this paper, both in terms of anterior posterior knee movement, displacement, as well as the forces in each graph. And I think that, and then we compare everything to the intact knee. So I think that this paper clearly showed that it's an advantage of doing two graphs rather than putting graph in the anterior medial portion only. So the indication is that the posterior lateral position is also important because most of the time we finish reconstruction, we just worry about the anterior medial. We do these subluxation tests, Lachman tests, if you will. It's really just to test the anterior medial. But if you flex the knee more, the posterior lateral is, or extend the knee more, the posterior lateral graph is actually very important.
So let me ask you a question. If you had to do the study 20 years later in 2022, would you have done anything different?
Well, in terms of experimental procedure, the concept of trying to find what you want to find, the answer is no, because it was really a well-designed series of studies to answer the questions that we posted. But of course, today, the robots are better, the force sensors are better. It's probably worth repeating, see if one can even get more precise results than what we have had before. I think that is probably, I actually would like to encourage people to revisit this type of study, see how you can improve upon it and even get more important data. On the other hand, people are not so concerned about double bundle, single bundle reconstruction, because we actually have a third study done by one fellow and two fellows, Yamamoto from Japan and Xu from Taiwan. And we were looking at just the more posterior lateral graft, anterior graft, different from this. And we find the single graft placed a little bit more posterior lateral position. That does the trick too. So that's where we were at that time. And people should, I think it's always repeat doing after 20 years to see what's going on.
So you think even tunnel placement is as important as even comparing the number of bundles, but placing a tunnel accurately is as important in the reconstruction, biomechanical restoration of the ACL?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, if you don't, I think if you put the graft in the right spot is important. You put versus put the graft in the wrong spot. I think that's it. And whether it's single or double, I think clinical data start to show that is probably a little bit less important as long as the graft is placed in the proper area.
Yeah, and what do you think is the biggest?
I think so. Do
Um,
you feel, as a clinician, do you feel that?
yeah, no, I agree with you. I think placement of the graft is very important. Maybe more important than even double versus single bundle reconstruction, but where you place it in the correct position for the patient. What do you think the biggest impact that in terms of this paper have in the field of sports medicine in ACL reconstruction? This is probably one of the first ones that described a double bundle reconstruction biomechanically, right?
Yeah. I think the big impact of this particular paper is, I think, and the reason why it's cited so often is because as a surgeon or other basic science researcher, you're looking for something as a standard to approach, to use that as a platform to jump off to what you want to do. I think this paper gives a fundamental baseline for you to look at, what you want to do. I think I would say that is probably the biggest contribution to this paper.
And after this is, when did Dr. Fu start doing double bundle reconstruction? Was it right after this paper, or was it before he was already doing it?
I think this was done before that, because the concept started probably before 2000, and then we went on to do this paper at 2000, about 2000. It takes probably more than 2 years to get it published, so from the beginning.
Right. And do you have any other take-home points for the ACL that you learned in your career for the AJSM readership?
Well, I actually feel for the future, because as a person interested in research, you're always thinking about the future. And in last 10 years of my academic career, I have tried to, with now the modern biotechnology, I'm much more into ACL healing. And that should be or should have another, it contribute to it's a new armamentarium for orthopedic surgeons. Excuse me, sports medicine surgeons. And we have actually used biological augmentation, mostly using biological scaffolds to encourage the healing to take place. But ACL heals so slow, then the attachment sites become weakened in time. So we create a magnesium ring device to tie the ACL. So it's like loading the ACL at the two ends of the ACL, protect the healing site, encourage it to heal. And then we can get the best of both worlds. And we spent 10 years working on this. And I wish I was 20 years younger, I could continue this particular, but I think biological and mechanical augmentation to heal the ACL is something that I encourage people to look into it, to pursue it. And I think that is really the holy grail for the future.
Well, that's great. And my last question for you is, what advice would you have for researcher or clinicians that wants to do research, given all the experience you have? What's three advice or a couple of advice you would give to us?
I think research is a long game. Any project that we get involved in the past 5 decades, it's almost like a 10-year, every project, 10 years. So people need to think about that I'm going to accomplish something in a longer time period. I think then that work is probably more meaningful and lasting. But to do that, one needs to learn. Of course, you need to find mentors, you have to do all these things, but learn it. But most important thing I've been teaching is there's 3 words that we always need to know. First word is why. Why do you want them? Why do you want to do something? I think that is means that you are well read to be able to ask the question why. And second word is what to do. Just many other choices to get the solution, what to do. And that probably you need to find out with a collaborator, with somebody else that are more senior, experienced to work with you. And the third is how.
Mhm.
I always thought how is the easiest of all the three. But nowadays everybody's focused on how.
Yeah.
But that is the easy part, because if you can look at why, what, and your how will work out really well. And it's not going to be mistake laden and wasting time. So it's why, what, and how.
That's great. So with that, I really appreciate your time, Dr. Wu, and thank you so much for doing this interview with us.
Thank you very much for having me.